You can't just live here without joining the HOA. The voice cut through the morning air like a rusty chainsaw. I had just finished moving the last box into our new home, a beautiful two-story log-style house nestled at the edge of Pinebrook Hills. My wife, Lisa, was unloading groceries from the SUV, and our two boys, Daniel and Chris, were already racing their bikes up and down the quiet, winding street. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, and I should have known it wouldn't last. I looked up from the tailgate of my truck, squinting against the sunlight, and saw her, a middle-aged woman marching across our front lawn with a clipboard in one hand and a Bluetooth earpiece in the other. Her hair was tied in a painfully tight bun, her oversized sunglasses reflected the whole neighborhood like mirrored lenses of doom, and her voice was drenched in entitlement. Every step she took screamed self-importance. "I'm Karen, president of the Pinebrook Hills HOA," she announced like she was declaring war. "You didn't attend the orientation. And according to our bylaws, all residents must attend the HOA welcome session within 24 hours of moving in." I wiped the sweat from my brow and gave her a half-smile. "We're not part of the HOA. That was made clear when we bought the property. This house was listed as non-HOA, and my realtor verified that before we signed." Karen blinked, as if what I'd said had personally offended her. "That's impossible. Every property on this street is part of the HOA. I would know, I've been the president for the last 11 years. "I don't know what to tell you," I said calmly. "We bought the place legally. No HOA included." "Well, we'll see about that." She scribbled something down on her clipboard and spun around like a disgruntled mall manager. "Expect a notice." Within 2 hours, that notice arrived. A single sheet of cheap printer paper taped to our front door with packaging tape. It read, "You are in violation of HOA Code 7.14, failure to register. Immediate attendance required. Fines will accumulate daily." Lisa pulled it off the door and handed it to me with a raised eyebrow. "Is this even legal?" "Nope," I said with a chuckle. "It's paper Karen printed from her home office. No legal seal, no attorney name, not even proper formatting. It's junk." But that didn't stop her. The next morning, I found another notice on our mailbox, this one with the word "Final Warning" in all caps and underlined 5 times. Karen was standing across the street in her bathrobe, sipping coffee, watching us like a hawk. She waved. Lisa waved back with a forced smile and whispered, "We should have bought the cabin in the mountains instead." "You're not wrong," I muttered. Then came the inspector. Around noon, a beat-up red minivan pulled into our driveway, and out stepped a lanky teenager with an oversized clipboard and a badge made of cardboard that said HOA Enforcement. He introduced himself as Kyle, Karen's nephew, and began walking around the property, muttering things like non-compliant landscaping and unregistered fencing. At one point, he measured our backyard deck with a measuring tape that had clearly snapped halfway through and was being held together with duct tape. "Buddy," I said, approaching him calmly. "You need to leave." "I'm just doing an inspection," he stammered. "Your aunt's authority ends where my deed begins. We're not part of the HOA. And even if we were, you're trespassing. Now leave." He looked unsure but eventually got back in the van and drove off, after accidentally hitting my trash can. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd back off after that. Maybe Karen would get the message. But no, she escalated. The next day we received 3 more notices, 2 of which were now demanding we pay $250 in back dues, and 1 threatening to put a lien on our house if we didn't comply. Karen came by personally again, this time with a smug grin and a stack of laminated HOA guidelines that she tossed on our front porch like confetti. "I'm giving you one last chance," she said, arms folded. "Sign the membership agreement, pay your dues, and we can avoid the fines and the trouble." I stepped out onto the porch, took one look at the laminated papers, and said, "Karen, let me make this clear, this home is outside your HOA. Your rules don't apply to us. You're harassing my family. Stop. She didn't like that. You think you're better than everyone here? You think you can just ignore the rules because you're new? This neighborhood has standards. I leaned a little closer, my voice low but firm. I've followed rules my whole life. Military rules. Federal protocols. International operations. I've fought in deserts where the only rule was survival. What I won't follow are fake rules made up by someone with a god complex and a clipboard. She blinked hard. For a moment, something in my eyes must have registered with her. But just as fast as it appeared, the moment passed. You'll regret this, she hissed before stomping off. That night, Lisa and I sat on the porch sipping iced tea. The boys were inside watching a movie, unaware of the brewing war outside. I could feel something coming. Karen wasn't done. People like her never quit when they're wrong, they just double down. And as the sun dipped below the hills and our neighborhood lights flickered on one by one, I said to my wife, she's going to call the cops next. Lisa looked over at me. Do you think they'll take her seriously? I gave a dry laugh. Maybe. Until they realize who they're dealing with. Because what Karen didn't know, what no one in this quiet little neighborhood knew, was that I wasn't just a new neighbor with a calm voice and a pickup truck. I was Commander Jason McConnell, recently retired from a Tier 1 unit in Special Forces, still active in federal operations when called. And if Karen thought she was the one with the power, she was about to find out what real authority looked like. The next morning started off like any other, at least for the first few minutes. Lisa was cooking pancakes, the boys were getting ready for school, and I had just stepped outside to grab the newspaper when I noticed 2 patrol cars slowly rolling down the street. They weren't speeding. They weren't sirens blazing. But they were headed straight toward our driveway with a purpose. I already knew. Karen stood at the end of her own driveway, dressed like she was ready for a courtroom appearance, neat blazer, folder in hand, smug expression locked onto her face like it was carved from stone. She waved at the officers, then pointed to our house with dramatic flair. You'd think she'd just identified an international fugitive hiding out in suburbia. One of the officers, a younger guy with a nervous smile, stepped out and walked toward me. His partner followed behind, more stoic, with a hand resting near his holster. I stayed calm, relaxed, respectful. That's how you avoid unnecessary tension. Especially when you know the law better than they do. Good morning, sir, the younger officer said. We received a complaint from the Homeowners Association stating that your family has refused to comply with mandatory HOA rules. They've also reported threats and non-cooperation. I kept my hands where they could see them and nodded. You mind if I ask which law I've broken? He hesitated. The older officer finally spoke. Do you have paperwork on this property? We'd like to confirm whether or not your home falls under HOA jurisdiction. Of course, I said. Give me 1 second. I went inside, grabbed the deed folder, one I had ready specifically for this kind of stunt, and handed them the documentation. The seal was fresh, the county registry was stamped, and the exemption from any and all HOA contracts was highlighted. I'd made sure when buying the place to steer clear of HOA entanglements. I'd seen too many horror stories. Both officers examined the paperwork for several minutes. I stood in silence. Lisa watched from the kitchen window. Karen, on the other hand, was already pulling out her phone and recording like this was some reality TV segment. After a quiet exchange between the officers, the older one turned to me and said, "Looks like you're right, sir. Your property isn't listed under any HOA coverage. That makes these fines and complaints unenforceable." I gave a polite nod. Appreciate you taking the time to verify. But Karen wasn't about to give up that easily. What? She shouted, storming across the lawn. Are you just going to let them ignore the rules? He's violating noise ordinances, lawn care requirements, parking regulations. He left his trash bins out a full hour past pickup. The younger officer tried to reason with her. Ma'am, those may be HOA regulations, but they don't apply to someone who's not a member. You can't force someone into an HOA they never agreed to join. Karen turned beet red. He's a danger to our community. I'm telling you, he's aggressive. He threatened me. My expression didn't change, but I locked eyes with the officer. Ask her to provide a formal statement with evidence. I'll happily provide my own. The officers didn't even write anything down. They just told her to keep interactions civil and headed back to their cars. That should have been the end. Anyone reasonable would have taken the hint. But Karen wasn't reasonable. By mid-afternoon, I received 3 voicemails, one from a so-called HOA legal representative, who turned out to be her cousin, one from Karen herself threatening a lawsuit, and one that said, "We're going to handle this the hard way now." I played that last message twice. I knew what was coming. So I made a call of my own, not to the local police, not to the city attorney, but to an old contact from my special operations days. I'd kept a tight circle after retirement, and certain clearances remained intact due to contract consulting I did for federal agencies. I explained the situation in short form, left out the petty stuff, and flagged the situation under an ongoing civilian harassment and impersonation threat. That night, I made sure the family stayed inside. I reviewed the security cams, double-checked the property fence, and prepped the emergency lighting just in case. Lisa raised an eyebrow when she saw me in the garage quietly checking the biometric lockbox. "Do you really think she'll try something crazy?" I sighed, keeping my voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. Not her. But people she might involve? Maybe. She's not smart enough to know when to stop, and eventually someone's going to answer her lies the wrong way. I wasn't wrong. At 3:42 a.m., we were jolted awake by the sharp glare of spotlights cutting through our bedroom windows. "Come out with your hands where we can see them." A voice barked from a loudspeaker. "You are surrounded." I rolled out of bed and calmly told Lisa, "Stay with the boys. Lock the bedroom door. I've got this." Outside, multiple law enforcement vehicles had cordoned off the street. Half a dozen tactical officers were positioned around my house. I could hear the thrum of a low-flying chopper in the distance. The only person smiling? Karen. She was standing at the end of her driveway again, filming the entire thing, whispering commentary like she was narrating a true crime documentary. She'd told them we were armed squatters. That we'd threatened the neighborhood. That we were hostile, possibly dangerous ex-military types off our rocker. Unfortunately for her, the agency she'd triggered into action wasn't one she could lie to. Because once I stepped outside with my hands calmly raised, one of the tactical officers stepped forward, looked at me, then blinked in shock. "Wait, hold your fire," he called out. "That's Commander McConnell." Everything changed in an instant. The next 5 minutes would be the longest of Karen's life. The transformation in the scene was immediate. One moment, Karen was standing confidently at the end of her driveway, her phone out, documenting what she surely thought would be her greatest neighborhood victory: Karen defeats dangerous squatters. The next moment, everything flipped. "Commander McConnell," the SWAT team leader repeated, lowering his rifle. Every tactical officer turned. Eyes widened. Tension shifted like a wave rolling off a cliff. The man who had spoken, Sergeant Riggs, stepped forward, removing his helmet. "Sir, I didn't realize it was you. We received a code 17 from the local PD, didn't even know it involved your residence." I gave him a nod, staying calm, my voice even. "I figured as much. Someone here's been filing false reports, using emergency channels to settle personal disputes." Karen's smug grin had vanished. She blinked fast, still trying to process what had just been said. Commander? Wait, what do you mean, Commander? Riggs turned toward her, instantly switching from recognition to protocol. Ma'am, I need you to step away from this area. This is now a federal-involved matter. You filed a false emergency report, and interfered with federal personnel. I'm advising you to remain silent until you're questioned. Karen took a step back. No, I didn't know he was some military guy. He said he wasn't part of the HOA. He wouldn't follow the rules. He was threatening me. Riggs turned toward me. Sir, do you want to file the official complaint now, or would you prefer to coordinate through the agency? I'll coordinate through the agency. For now, de-escalation's enough. But she needs to understand the gravity of what she just did. Karen stammered, but no words came out. A second tactical vehicle rolled up behind the initial wave, and two plainclothes agents stepped out, both from the same federal agency I'd spent years contracting with. One of them, Ramirez, gave me a brief nod before walking straight toward Karen, identifying himself. Ma'am, you've triggered a joint force SWAT deployment under false pretenses. That qualifies as misuse of emergency resources under federal code. You've also submitted falsified reports about a private citizen with federal clearance. You're now subject to formal investigation. Karen's face had gone pale. Her lips trembled. I didn't mean to. He was being hostile. I thought he was dangerous. I took a few steps forward and finally spoke. You assumed because I didn't bow to your clipboard. You thought you could bully us like you've bullied the rest of the street. But you called in an armed response based on a lie. Do you understand what could have happened if one of these officers hadn't recognized me? That part landed hard. I could see it, her knees were wobbling slightly. She looked toward her house, then back at the gathering officers, as if hoping this was all a bad dream. Lisa had stepped out by now, standing behind me on the porch, arms crossed. One of the plainclothes agents approached her to collect a witness statement. Inside, I could see our boys peeking through the upstairs window, watching a scene unfold that no school would ever teach them about in a textbook. I looked around the neighborhood. Several porch lights had flipped on. Curious neighbors had begun to step outside, sleepy and stunned by the sudden wave of law enforcement. One by one, I caught their eyes, and they weren't looking at me like I was the problem. They were looking at Karen. Apparently, I wasn't the only person she'd harassed. Her reign had stretched far and wide, just no one had ever stood up to her. Until now. Sergeant Riggs returned after a quick discussion with the county liaison. Sir, we've confirmed she's made multiple 911 calls over the past 2 months involving exaggerated or entirely fabricated complaints. We'll be turning everything over to the county prosecutor. We're standing down here unless you'd like to press immediate charges. I shook my head. Not tonight. But I wanted on record that this wasn't just petty neighbor drama. She escalated this to a federal breach. Yes, sir. We'll handle it. Karen was no longer talking. Her phone was hanging at her side now, recording nothing. The show was over. The mask had dropped. And with every officer who ignored her and every neighbor who turned away in disgust, it finally began to sink in. She'd lost control. The next morning, the sun rose like nothing had happened, but Pinebrook Hills would never be the same again. I was sipping coffee on the porch when my next-door neighbor, Mr. Langley, a quiet man in his 60s, walked over with a sheepish smile. Heard what happened last night, he said. About time someone put her in her place. She's been bothering others too? Langley nodded. She fined my wife $200 for planting sunflowers instead of roses. Told us we couldn't hang our flag on the porch. Even made my grandson cry when he rode his scooter on the sidewalk. I shook his hand. Thanks for telling me. It won't happen again. Karen's house remained quiet. Her car hadn't moved. Word spread quickly, she was being investigated for fraud, harassment, impersonating an official, and misuse of emergency services. Me? I went back to trimming the hedges and fixing the kids' bike tires. Life, finally, was settling. But one thing was clear to everyone now: you don't try to intimidate a quiet family minding their own business, especially when one of them gets called commander by a SWAT team. 3 weeks later, Pinebrook Hills was quieter than it had ever been. The tension that had once lingered on every porch, whispered in every side glance, had lifted like fog burned away by morning sun. Karen's yard, once immaculate to the point of obsession, was now overgrown. Her mailbox overflowed with unopened letters, many of them official-looking. The HOA president sign she used to have in her yard? Gone. Removed by the county under legal order. Neighbors who once avoided my family were now waving from across the street. A few even stopped by with pie and kind words. It wasn't that they didn't like us before, it was that they'd been afraid. Karen had run the neighborhood like a private kingdom, and she'd ruled it with threats, fines, and fear. Most had fallen in line because they didn't want the headache. But now? Now they were free. I'd kept my word and didn't press charges that night, but federal investigations moved swiftly once the agency took over. Within days, Karen was served with a cease and desist, a court summons, and a temporary restraining order, not just from us, but from 2 other families she'd targeted. The fake HOA bylaws she'd been distributing were discovered to be plagiarized and doctored, filled with illegal language and fake enforcement powers. She wasn't just a bully, she was a fraud. The scam had gone on for nearly 5 years. She'd forced dozens of homeowners, especially the elderly and single parents, to pay her monthly dues, which she deposited into a personal account disguised as a community fund. She claimed to use it for neighborhood maintenance, but no such services ever existed. Instead, the money went toward her landscaping, wine club, and monthly trips to a private spa out of town. The total she pocketed? Over $68,000. The news hit the local papers. Headlines read, "Fake HOA President Under Federal Investigation" and "Neighborhood Scam Uncovered by Retired Special Forces Commander." Her name trended online for days. And the best part? Every single homeowner she scammed received a notice from the county and state attorney's office: full restitution would be pursued. Civil and criminal charges were moving forward. She was banned from leading or participating in any HOA-related activity for life. As for us, we received a formal apology from the sheriff's department and a personal visit from Sergeant Riggs, who dropped by one afternoon with a grin and a box of donuts. "Figured you deserved something for not filing formal charges," he said. Lisa laughed. "It's hard to stay mad when the donuts are still warm." But the real satisfaction didn't come from the legal outcomes. It came from watching Karen finally realize what true accountability looks like. One afternoon, I spotted her through the window as she returned from her hearing downtown. She stepped out of a friend's car; her own vehicle had been impounded for unpaid taxes. And hurried up her driveway, head down, sunglasses hiding her face. She didn't look like the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac anymore. She looked like someone who'd finally been told no enough times to believe it. That evening, as I grilled burgers on the back patio, Daniel, my youngest, asked, "Dad, is Karen going to jail?" I paused, flipping a patty. Maybe. Maybe not. But either way, she's not in charge anymore. And that's what matters. He nodded thoughtfully and returned to chasing fireflies with his brother. Later that week, the neighborhood came together for a block barbecue, an idea Lisa pitched that everyone embraced. Folks brought drinks, salads, desserts. A band of teenagers brought guitars and played campfire songs under the stars. Laughter echoed down the street. For the first time since we moved in, Pinebrook Hills felt like a community instead of a dictatorship. As we packed up for the night, Mr. Langley handed me a cold soda and said, "We were scared of her. We didn't know how to push back. But what you did? You reminded us we still have a voice." I just smiled and said, "All it takes is one person to say enough is enough." From that day forward, nobody dared knock on my door with a clipboard. Nobody told my wife what color the flower beds should be. Nobody demanded fees or fines or forms. The fake HOA was gone, and real respect had taken its place. Karen? She moved out 2 months later under the weight of lawsuits, fines, and total social isolation. The house went up for sale. Rumor was, she left town for good. And our family? We stayed. Because this house, this street, this quiet little slice of the world, we earned it. And the next time someone tries to bully a neighborhood, they better hope they don't end up calling the cops on a man who still gets saluted as commander by an entire SWAT team.